What's up, TUMNAD lectures? In this video, we are taking two into what we call the blood circulation. If it's your very first time to watch me, please make sure you like the video, comment down in the comment section, and please subscribe. Let's go ahead and get started. During the study of what we call the blood circulation, we are going to be following these kind of the objectives. We shall look at what we call the definition of what we call the blood circulation. We look at what we call the different types of what we call the circulation that happens within the body. And then even also we shall look at what we call the principles of what we call circulatory function. And then finally we shall go ahead and look at what we call the functions played by each kind of the different type of what we call the circulation. Without wasting a lot of time, let's go ahead and get started. So now when we talk about blood circulation, what is blood circulation? Generally, blood circulation just simply means the flow of blood within the vessels throughout the entire body parts. Okay, that is a simple definition of what we call blood circulation: the flow of blood inside the blood vessels to the entire body tissues. Okay, it's all that simple. So now going into what we call the types of what we call the blood circulation, we have a lot of the different types of what we call blood circulations, which is going to be happening in what we call the human body. Now, these are the major types of what we call the blood circulation. Okay, the first one is what we call the pulmonary circulation. Okay, what we call the pulmonary circulation, and then the second one is what we call the systemic circulation. Okay, systemic circulation. And then the third one is what we call the coronary. Okay, is what we call the coronary circulation. Okay, so now there are even many other kind of the different types of what we call blood circulation, but these are super very important to know, and we're going to be taking you through all these kind of what we call the different types of what we call the circulation. Now, we are going to be now taking you through what we call the pulmonary circulation. We go into slightly into the detail, and then in the next video we shall go into what we call the systemic circulation, and then even also we shall have to look at what we call the coronary circulation. Let's go ahead and get started and look at what we call the pulmonary circulation. Starting off on what we call the pulmonary circulation. Generally, pulmonary circulation, this is the type of the circulation which is going to be happening in what we call between the heart and what we call the lungs. Okay, that is it. You're going to be seeing how the blood is going to be moving from the heart, it goes to the lungs, and then it comes back to the heart. Okay, it's all that simple. But before we go into what we call the pulmonary circulation, let's first go through this anatomy of the diagrammatic illustration. And of course, the whole of this diagram here is going to be what we call the diagram of the human heart. Now, this one here is going to be representing what we call the lungs, and we have just zoomed out on one of the bulbous structure, which we are calling the alveolus, which is going to be a site of what we call gas exchange. Okay, we're going to be having the tons and tons of what we call alveoli, but here we have just zoomed out on one of them. Okay, the same thing which is happening here is exactly the same which is going to be happening in this side. Okay, however much I have not drawn it here, but it is exactly the same kind of diagrammatic illustration of this side of what we call the right lung. So now this one here is going to be what we call the left lung, and then this side here is supposed to be what we call the right lung. Okay. So now you have said that this one is going to be what we call the alveolus, where our gas exchange is going to be taking place, because the primary function of the pulmonary circulation is going to be when what we call the gas exchange. Okay, so now having now that basic idea of what we call this diagram, let's go ahead and see the step by step in the flow of what we call the pulmonary circulation. Okay, now the first point to know is that where is pulmonary circulation going to be starting from, and where does it end? Okay, pulmonary circulation is going to be mainly starting from what we call the right ventricle. Okay, it's all that simple. When this right ventricle, when it squeezes the blood as if it was never squeezed before, it will push this blood to knock these structures here before the blood enters what we call the pulmonary trunk. At the back of your mind, you should know that this blood is deoxygenated. Okay, it is deoxygenated. So now we have started from here. This is going to be now our starting point. When this ventricle, the right ventricle contracts, it will push this blood to knock these structures here. These structures here are going to be now our second point, and we are calling them the pulmonary semilunar valve. Once they open, they will allow blood to come to this kind of big kind of this blood vessel, which we are calling the pulmonary trunk. So now it's going to be now our step in what we call the pulmonary circulation. Now, when this kind of the pulmonary trunk comes over here, it's going to be bifurcated. It's going to be dividing into two: the left pulmonary artery and then the right pulmonary artery. Now, this is going to be now our first kind of the step. Okay, this is going to be now our first kind of the step. Okay, and then from there we are going to be seeing that this kind of the left pulmonary artery, it is now also going to be now breaking into some other kind of the blood vessels, which we are calling the pulmonary arterioles. So now these ones here are going to be what we call the pulmonary arterioles. This is going to be now our fifth step. Okay. Then from the pulmonary arterioles, we are also going now to be having some other kind of the tiny kind of the structures that provides what we call exchange surface because of having a thin kind of what we call the membrane. This area here are what we call the pulmonary capillaries that are going to be providing what we call exchange of what we call gases. So now this one here is going to be now our sixth step. So now we have said that number 6 is going to be now what we call this kind of the blood capillaries, which we are calling the pulmonary capillaries. Okay, and then from there we shall have down the multiple kind of what we call the pulmonary capillaries, which we are calling the post pulmonary capillaries, which are going to be now coming together to form what we call the pulmonary venules. So now these ones here are going to be what we call the pulmonary venules. They are now going to be now our step number 7. So now our step number 7 is going to be this post pulmonary capillaries, which we are calling the pulmonary venules. Okay, and then the pulmonary venules, multiple of them will come together and unite to make a big kind of the vessel, which we are calling the pulmonary vein. So now this one here is going to be what we call our pulmonary vein. So now we are going to be now our eighth step. Okay. And then from there, this kind of the pulmonary veins, they are now going to be pushing this blood and it enters this beautiful kind of the chamber, which we are calling the left atrium. So now this one here is going to be now our ninth step in what we call the pulmonary circulation. Okay, and then by gravity or even by passive mechanism, blood is going to be forced to move down into what we call the left ventricle, but it has to pass this big kind of these structures here, which we are calling the bicuspid valve. Okay, so now these structures here are going to be now our 10th step. Okay, and then the last one, which is going to be now step number 11, is going to be what we call the left ventricle. Okay, so now that's going to be now a step by step in what we call the pulmonary circulation. So now let's put all that one in writing and see how exactly it's going to be happening. So now we have said that we have step from number 1 up to number 11. Now, we have said that the first kind of the step in what we call pulmonary circulation, it was the starting point, which was going to be what we call right ventricle. Okay, right ventricle. When the right ventricle contracts, we will push this blood to step number 2, which we are calling the pulmonary semilunar valve. Okay, we are calling it pulmonary semilunar valve. Super very important. And then from there, our step number 3 was what we call the pulmonary trunk. Okay, what we are calling the pulmonary trunk. Okay, and of course we said that the pulmonary trunk is going to be dividing into two. Okay, so now you're going to be having what we call pulmonary arteries. Okay, pulmonary arteries. Okay, and of course for the case you're going to be having the right, you're going to be having what we call the right, and then even also the left. Okay, and then from the pulmonary arteries, we're going to be having now step number 5, which is going to be what we call the pulmonary arterioles. Okay, which we are calling the pulmonary arterioles. Okay, the pulmonary arterioles. Okay, and then from there, from the pulmonary arterioles, blood is going to be reaching what we call the exchange surface. We are going to be having what we call the alveolus. Here we are going to be having exchange of the gases. What do I mean by exchange of the gases? We're going to be having now the carbon dioxide being expelled. Okay, and then we shall have oxygen. We shall have now oxygen entering. So now have oxygen entering what we call what we call the blood capillaries. Okay. Our step number 6 is going to be what we call the pulmonary, which we are calling the pulmonary capillaries. Okay. Now, from the pulmonary capillaries, the post-pulmonary capillaries, we are now going to be now having oxygen-rich blood. For that reason, I'll be using a red marker because now we have gotten what we call the oxygen and have dropped what we call the carbon dioxide. So now, step number 7 is going to be what we call the pulmonary venules. And of course, multiple of the pulmonary venules will come together and make what we call the pulmonary veins. Okay. And of course, the pulmonary veins, you're going to be having the two of them. You're going to be having that one from the right and then also what we call the left. Okay. What we call the right and what we call the left pulmonary veins. Okay. Eventually, these pulmonary veins are going to be dropping this blood into this number 9, which we are calling the left atrium. Okay, we are going to be having what we call the left atrium. Okay, and then from the left atrium, this blood will knock these valves, which we are calling the mitral, or what we call the bicuspid, valve. Super very important. And then finally, our blood will drop in this chamber, which we are calling the left ventricle. Okay, and then when the blood leaves the left ventricle, we are no longer in pulmonary circulation. We shall be now entering what we call the systemic circulation. In other words, this left ventricle is serving as an end point of what we call the pulmonary circulation, but at the same time, it is also a starting point of what we call the systemic circulation. Okay, so TUMNAD, in this video, we have covered what we call the blood circulation. We have looked at what we call the definition of blood circulation. We looked at what we call the different types of what we call the blood circulation, the pulmonary, the systemic, and then the coronary circulation. We went ahead and looked at what we call the pulmonary circulation in great detail, step by step in the blood flow through what we call the pulmonary circulations. Okay, so now in the next video, we are going to be taking you through what we call the general principles of what we call circulatory function, and even also shall go on what we call the functions of what we call the pulmonary circulations. Okay, TUMNAD as always, until we meet next time.